Hey guys, today I'm going to be building a custom micro brushless quadcopter, and these are all the parts that I'm going to be using. So I have some gem fan props here, or 40mm, so it's going to be very small. This is the flight controller. It's a diatone Mamba toothpick style flight controller. I have a Foxier micro lollipop antenna in black with a UFL connector. I have a Runcam Nano 2, which is a very small camera, but it performs very well. The motors are the Beta FPV. I think they're 1102s, so that's what they look like. The frame is a micro heli frame. It is extremely tiny. It's the frame for their Tinyhawk 2. So that's the base frame that I'm going to be using. Comes with a TPU canopy. And it is not designed for a toothpick style flight controller, but I think I can make it work. And that also comes with a little battery strap. See if I'll use that later. I'm going to be running this on an XT30 since I have a bunch of XT30 batteries. The video transmitter is the TBS Unify Nano, and the receiver is the FrSky XM Plus. So let's get to building. I have an electronics plan here, so that should be everything we need to know for wiring everything. So you can find, no matter what flight controller you can probably find something online that shows what each of the tabs do, and normally they also come with a diagram. So I think it's a really good idea to make one of these if you're going to be doing this. I always like to start with the frame and getting that all sorted out with the motors and whatnot. So with this frame, you get the actual frame. It's extremely tiny, so it doesn't have prop guards, which is, they make one with prop guards. I chose the one without, just because it's lighter. This is the canopy that fits standard 14mm by 14mm nano cameras. A little battery strap here. So we'll throw that up to the side for now. Comes with a nice little case. I'm not sure that the actual drone will fit in it. I don't think it will fit in it with the props on, but that's still a really nice touch. Okay, so I think the first thing we're going to do is get the motors mounted, but before we do that, we have to take apart what is already assembled on the frame. So I'm going to start by taking off all these posts, and I'm going to have to swap positions because I am not using the stock board, and then we can mount the motors. So let's go. So when you have those posts mounted, you should be able to just take your flight controller and push it right on them like that, and that's how the flight controller will be mounted. You put the screws through the thin bottom plate here, and then they go into the posts, and they also go through the main bottom plate. So that way there's nothing sticking out of the bottom like crazy. You have your battery mounting part, and then you have your 26 by 26 mounting posts here. So now let's get on to mounting the motors. Okay, so when mounting the motors, here, I'll open them up here. So in the box you get your 4 motors, and you get a little pack of hardware here. Well, there's actually quite a bit in here. So what you're going to want to do is pull out a motor. So these ones have plugs. I'm not going to be using them, so you can snip those off. We'll do that later. If you're using plugs, obviously don't snip them off. So the motors are going to mount on the frame like this, and the wires are going to come off the motor and they're gonna tuck in to the flight controller right there. So what we need to do is we need to figure out what size of screw we need. So there are two different sizes that they give you in here. There are these screws here, which are quite a bit longer than the others, or than the other ones. And here are the other ones. Here, so that's the shorter one, and that's the longer one. So what you need to figure out is which screw is not going to touch the motor when you put it on. So the easiest way to do that is just put the screw inside one of the holes and put your motor up beside it. So the long ones are way too long. So we are going to mount the motors with the short screws. So get a pair of tweezers and take all the long screws out of there, or take all the short ones out. For me, I'm going to take the long ones out. Alright, so you should be left with 12 of the shorter screws. And now we're just going to take our motors out and get them mounted to the frame. So personally, I find the easiest way to do this is get one screw in, and from there it should be very easy to just push the rest through their little holes and get them lined up. Alright, so there is the first motor mounted up. You can see the wires run perfectly along there, and we'll cut them later and solder them onto the board right there. So let's do the rest of them off camera, since it is relatively boring. So now that we have the motors soldered onto the frame, we're going to put that aside for now, over in the corner, and we are going to grab the flight controller here, and we're going to start soldering on some components. So the flight controller comes with a capacitor and a bunch of gummies. You can put those aside at the moment. We're not going to solder on the motors yet, but we are going to solder on the receiver and the video transmitter. So first, I am going to solder on the receiver here. So the XM Plus comes with some wiring and the actual receiver. So if we put the canopy on where it's going to be, put the receiver inside there, I think a really good place for the antennas would be just poking right out the back of the drone, like so. That we're just going to use some mini zip tie them to there, and that should hold the antennas out with shrink wrap, and that should be a very good place for them. So let's figure out what length of wire we're going to need. So if it's going to be like that, okay, they gave us a pretty short signal wire, but it should be long enough. Their square pad there is S-bus. Yeah, so that's going to be long enough, which means we're going to solder the wires to the receiver first, and then we can solder them to the board once we're done with that. There's also RSSI. There's an RSSI pad there. So that will be going to that pad there. We're going to take the board out before soldering it on because we do not want to melt parts of that. So let's get going. Okay, so if we look on our little diagram here, it shows that the one to the left, or the top, the highest one, is S-bus. The one next to that in the middle is 5 volt. The one way down here is ground. So we're going to wire it like red as 5 volt, black as ground, and then yellow as S-bus. And then we'll see if we can get this little pad down here wired up as a RSSI pad. So I'll get back when I am done soldering this because it is extremely difficult. I'm going to time lapse it, but I just won't talk through it. This was bad. There. Okay, so I have the wire soldered on. So this is S-bus. Red here is 5 volt, and then black is ground. So if we go and look at our diagram here, S-bus, 5 volt, and ground. So let's solder this onto the board here. Okay, as you can see there, I have the receiver soldered on. So let's get the video transmitter ready to be soldered. So if we take a look at these wires here, we get, and the shrink wrap, there's some shrink wrap. So first thing is this nice shrink wrap that we can put around it when we're done. I also have some for the receiver. Then we have this small white wire. Actually, I switched that for the pre-tuned one. Red, black, and yellow. So one of these, I'm going to use white for smart audio, and black and red for ground and power, and then this for video signal. Now we need to figure out, so these are going to solder on like that to there. So if we flip it over and point it a bit out like that to the back, the antenna will be pointing out in the right direction. So I think that's how we're going to do it. Don't want to cut the wires too short, so I'll leave it right about there. I'll cut them all there. Can put those wires to use somewhere else. So I have it. The wires are gonna go like that, and then I'll just flip it over on top, and we'll figure it out there. So I'm gonna do a time lapse of me soldering everything on. So here we go. Next, we have the camera. So let's open that up. This is the Runcam Nano 2. So obviously there's no connector on this, so I'm going to snip that off and solder the camera right onto those 3 pads there. Now I have the camera soldered on, VTX, and receiver. So next is the motors. So all these little pads are here, 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 and here. I am going to tin up now and then solder everything on once we get over to the quad. So here we go. Okay, so now I'm gonna shrink wrap the receiver. So I don't need very much for it. So I'm gonna measure it to there and cut that off. Or don't need it, so pretty much in half. That piece will work for the video transmitter, and this, I'll slide it over these antennas and do it. Okay, so now I'm gonna shrink it with this lighter. So I guess I'll have to do this off camera. Okay, that is shrunk. You can still access the wires and this button, which is the bind button. And we can still switch antennas, but all the other parts are protected. So let's go on to the soldering the motors and the, actually, we'll do the, yeah, okay, we will do the battery connector first. Okay, so here, you're just gonna want to snip off the motor connector. Unless, of course, you're using motor connectors. And then you're gonna wanna measure these wires. So for me, obviously you want like a little bit of like, okay, in case you mess up or something, you want them to be a little longer. So I'm gonna cut them there. So I'm cutting that much off. So let's just snip that right off. There. And then repeat for the rest of the motors, and then I'll show you what to do next. Now I have all my motor wires cut to length, no connectors on them. So now I'm just going to snip off a little bit of the end and tin them and solder them onto the board. So time lapse. Okay, now that we have all the motors soldered on, I am going to tidy up all the motor wires. So just kind of put them into place down on the arms. We will secure them later. So you really just want to get them out of the way for now. Okay. Now we are going to install the VTX antenna right here. It's just a UFL, so you just take the VTX and pop the antenna on. So that, other than props and canopy and everything, this is the full quad. So So I'm gonna try powering it on. So here we go. Yeah, okay. See if it works. No smoke. It's a good sign. Let's check. The receiver light is on, which means that's powered on. The video transmitter light is also on, which means that's powered on. There's no way of telling if the camera's on or not. Hoping it's on. And we have lights on the flight controller right there telling us that the flight controller's on. And you heard the beeps. That means that the motors are working. So, let's go finish the assembly of it. We're gonna put the gummies in. I decided not to use the capacitor just because it's a 2S build. So let's choose the gummies. I'm gonna go with these purple ones. I bet there's a way of telling which ones you're supposed to use, but I'll go with the purple ones. So you just pop them in to these little holes here. So just quickly do that, and I'll be back. There, got all the gummies in. So now I'm just going to push the flight controller over the little posts, and then should be able to get it properly mounted. I'm gonna shrink wrap this VTX. I don't think this piece will be big enough. Probably not. Might be. I'll try it. So I'm gonna have to pop the antenna off. So I just pop that off. Slide the shrink wrap over the VTX. It's even harder than getting it on the receiver somehow. Slide that over that. Pop the antenna back in. And put the shrink wrap back over. I think that will work. It looks like it will work. Okay. I'll quickly shrink that. Okay, now the VTX has a shrink wrap over it. Okay, so I'm gonna grab a little bit of double-sided tape here. Gonna peel off a piece. Looks about the right size for the receiver. So I'm gonna cut this to size about there probably. Stick this onto the bottom of the receiver. And when you stick this onto the flight controller, you want to make sure that you're not touching any parts with metal on the flight controller. So that doesn't look like it will touch anything. Let's peel this off and get it on there. You want to try to get it as straight as you can. Doesn't have to be perfect, but looks nice if it is. Okay, so I've decided to mount the receiver on top of the flight controller and the video transmitter right there underneath. So that way I can still have that antenna going up there and the rest. I think it will work. Let's find out.